Welcome to the show. Is that what we do?
That's what we do here. We do Freightonomics here. This is Freightonomics. I'm Anthony Smith. You're Zach Strickland, and this is the show.
This is the show. So, welcome back to Freightonomics. For those of you that don't know, this is the show that combines the freight markets and what's happening in those with current economic trends and analysis, explaining some of those details along the way, talking about supply chain disruptions, anything from company earnings to less than truckload volumes. We cover it. We cover the gamut here. We don't try to limit ourselves or put ourselves in a rabbit hole. But Anthony Smith, lead economist at FreightWaves.
That me.
Zach Strickland, Director of Freight Market Intelligence. So today's show, we've got a big mixed bag of things today to cover. We're going to do kind of a hot take on a few different things. We are obviously in the environment that we can do that because there's a lot of different stuff going on in a lot of different corners, and no one thing is more important than the other. Anthony Smith.
My opinion is more important than yours. I know that much.
I can't argue. We do have, anybody in trucking knows that there's the tropical developments are always interesting and make things very interesting throughout the year. We've got one of those brewing, just in time for me to potentially take a vacation and wreck it down there in the Caribbean right now. It's not even named yet. It doesn't look like it's going to turn into too much just yet. But time will tell. It's still a good 4 to 5 days away. Anybody that hauls freight around the Gulf Coast, though, certainly should be paying attention to that. And, of course, Miami is in that cone of uncertainty, as they call it. So certainly something that we will be watching here closely at FreightWaves. Those storms tend to cause a lot of disruption, and we've had our share of disruption in this year's freight market. Volumes, Anthony Smith, continue to increase. Our tender volumes, and this is indicative of trucking activity in the United States. It hit an all-time high this week of 13,000, the OTVI, baselined at 10,000 on March 1st, 2018, and we are 30% higher than that value right now. So a lot of activity out there, a lot of supply chain disruption for those of you that have watched. We've had a lot of questions concerning, it can't be that high, can it?
Right.
We've had to address a lot of these questions here over the last little bit. And I think, it's hard, operating in the trucking world, the domestic trucking world. We just don't have a lot of information to go on. There's a lot of macroeconomic figures out there that have, a relationship with truckload and trucking, LTL trucking, supply chains. We have all sorts of different numbers out there that are provide some level of clarity, but without the level of detail of knowing exactly how many shipments Target has right now this week and how many shipments is Home Depot pushing across the ocean right now. There's really nobody out there that can tell us definitively exactly what's going on. But the OTVI is a very, spread out index. It has a wide breadth of variety in it. Doesn't mean that it doesn't necessarily have some bias at times, but so does the freight market.
Yeah.
At any given time, every Christmas, what do you think the type of freight dominates trucking?
I'm going to go on a guess or a whim here and just say maybe consumer items and gifts and presents.
And that
Santa Claus is a master of logistics.
That's what happens. That's what happens is any given time, certain shippers, customers dominate the freight market or have a strong influence in it.
Yeah.
It does not always mean that we are in this constant stagnant mix of here's 15% in industrial products moving through the economy, 25% of that is CPG, and 5% of it is auto manufacturing products, I mean, then there's also blurred lines between all of those.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think you just nailed it right there. I mean, there's produce season. There is a season where construction is very active during those spring months and sometimes into the summer. And then there's those times where seasonality just doesn't make sense, like now, because what is seasonality now? And things are on a different priority list. And so I think now what we're seeing is maybe we can't rely too heavily on some of those historical trends, and it gives us a lot more uncertainty on what's moving, but we know stuff is moving.
And not just historical trends, but historical relationships, historical connections. The way that we knew the world prior to COVID is no longer that exact way. We don't have the same exact strong connections between things that we used to have. And we're learning about those as we go at this point in time, obviously. But I think that the indication here, and I think we've already told the story about what OTVI is really telling us, because we can look at some of these market-to-market granularities and tell this is not simply a market that's just like, well, it's summer seasonal movements, getting ready for, we've already had our seasonal push of produce, et cetera, that drives a lot. No, we've got so much supply chain dislocation and an adaptation that's going on within that behavior, consumer behavior.
Yeah.
All these things are coming together, and it's creating this bubble of the freight market that it will eventually settle down.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree on that, the timing of which is under debate currently, and we're going to address that today a little bit. We've had, a lot of pretty solid economic releases.
Yeah, we had some upward movement on a month-to-month basis for some economic releases, but as you mentioned, I mean, there's a lot of the relationships are strange now.
Yeah, and the timing of which too. I mean, I think I wrote a chart of the week this week based on rail.
Yeah.
Rail data, and you're like, well, what does that have to do? And it's rail carloads. It's not even like container volumes. It was rail carloads, and the point of the article was simply that these rail carloads are raw materials. They're bulk items. They're chemicals. They're motor vehicle parts. Things that you can load in a hopper or a gondola, and then they just dump them on the floor of a production facility.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a direct connection to trucking. But the indication is once these factories and machines start getting going and turning on, it will only increase trucking volumes. To what extent and what percentage, nobody knows.
Yeah.
But those have a strong connection to the truckload market, and they lead it to an extent. So it's almost like, hey, watch out. But the big question for me is, will the maritime import, which still appears to be quite strong, will that supply chain adaptation, that inventory repositioning, consumers buying certain products to get ready to be living in their house, when will that start to slow down? And I think we are starting to see the at least stabilizing influences on that activity at this point in time. We're not seeing as much long-haul freight moving through the country as we were. Shorter haul freight is now kind of growing disproportionately a little bit. And also we're seeing some maritime indication that we're not seeing the booking activity that we saw earlier in the month start to slow. Doesn't mean that it's going to just die.
Right.
It just means that we might be reaching more of a point where volumes kind of settle.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily going to grow crazily or anything like that. And it's interesting to see. And, let's dive into some economic stuff here in a minute. But first up, let's go over, this kind of relates to what we've been talking about with people are not sure what to make of this really disconnected view from what they've seen traditionally in the freight market and what we're actually measuring. How can volumes be this high? How can tender rejection rates be this high? How can spot market rates be this high right now? It doesn't make any sense that they continue. Even you look at DAT releases, and they're even talking about how unseasonable trends and the expansion of spot rates. And they talk about network balances, and obviously that is a driving factor of the freight market when we talk about network balances. It's basically saying there's more freight coming out of Los Angeles than coming into it.
Yeah.
There's a constant imbalance there, but there's a stable imbalance. And a lot of times those imbalances become more pronounced or they shift to other areas of the country, but they're normally short-lived and they only last for a limited period of time. What we're seeing right now has been an extended period.
Equilibrium eventually finds itself. And as we jump into this first topic, just real quick, I forgot to mention, we are actively streaming right now on LinkedIn and Facebook. So I already see Eric Serta's in there. He says, my favorite data monger and economist. We appreciate you, Eric. Tim Dooner saying, bring it. Kyle Van Artston, Sponge Boat Engaged. Common Serban, why do we support California instead of supporting Ontario and BC for fresh produce? So people are active, and so
I like it.
We love to hear from you guys, and as we continue throughout this episode, join in the conversation, and without further ado, we can get into some of these stories.
Yeah. So big stories right now are the earnings, and obviously we don't get into the fine details of these earnings, but I think there's a lot to be gleaned from these earnings calls, and in regards of measuring what the market's doing, because what better barometer than a trucking carrier, a truckload carrier or a LTL or whoever, to tell us exactly what their experience is. Now, each one of these independently has their own mix of customers. One can, haul 50% target and the other can haul 50% produce. Yeah. And they're going to have a different response. But overall, when you lump them together, you get a pretty good idea of what's going on. We covered Knight-Swift last week in pretty good detail, mainly because they're the largest for-hire carrier in the United States. So they do have a pretty decent sized sample at just under 2% of the total for-hire capacity in the truckload market. But this week we had USA Truck come out, and again, I say they beat expectations. Yeah. But those were they were modified back after the first quarter, because keep in mind when they were talking about this stuff in April, pandemic was at its peak. We were just talking about shutting down for long periods of time, a lot of unknowns, a lot of uncertainty. And here we are talking about them beating expectations and actually having a pretty decent recovery sign. So to me, the things that stand out, their revenue. Actually, their revenue is only down, 7.8%. Does that mean that volumes are down? Not necessarily. Think about it this way. We're talking about quarter over quarter volume. I mean, I'm pretty sure their volumes were down, looking at some of these other things, but I don't think it was 7% down. You're talking about a year where we saw contracted rate deceleration. We saw a lot of that contracted. You look at the Cass truckload line haul index, you're talking about a 6% decrease in overall freight, spend on similar volumes year over year in January. That to me tells me that contracted rates are depressed. Yeah. We got a little bit of contraction on that side, at least in some level of the freight market. So we have to take those things into account when we're looking at these. So that's 7.8% down. Some of that's retraction, and you tell me that they, I would allocate 3 to 4% of that is just probably some rate contraction to an extent. Ignoring the spot contract mix, and USA Truck is notoriously heavy on the spot market,
and which leads the other?
Yeah, the spot market tends to lead the contract.
Gotcha.
Yeah, in most instances, but the spot market has to be a trend. It's a trend of the spot market, not necessarily, overall rates.
So a spike up in the spot isn't going to drag somebody's out of contract.
Right. So to me, this looks like they had a modest decline in this quarter, but you're talking about one quarter.
Yeah.
April, May, June. We talked about this with Knight-Swift. You're talking about one number representing 3 months, and those 3 months extremely differentiated in terms of how they were. April was 20 to 30% down by most people's accounts in terms of volumes. Then you have this June, and we're still in this expansionary state. Yeah. June was a good month. So you're telling me that we overcame a 20% lower April and only lost 7% in the quarter? I mean, that's a dramatic. That to me tells me that May and June were a lot better than anticipated. Right. And they were able to manage through it pretty well. Their revenue per loaded mile only down 12 cents. Their average length of haul was about the same. Deadhead percent up from 12.7% to 13.1%. Not a strong increase considering that we had such a bad month of April. Yeah. So you have to kind of climb through this a little bit and see that this is really not that bad of a freight market that we're operating in right now. Yeah. I mean, they even improved their OR, and of course there's a cost component in that, and they obviously manage their costs to an extent, but 98.6 to 97.8%, pretty decent, and that's on just the truck side, not on the consolidated side, including their logistics end. But that to me tells me that things were not that bad in the second quarter. And you think about it, go back to April. Mm-hmm. How bad were we thinking the second quarter? We thought it was going to be a
horrific.
Bloodbath.
Yeah. And I think that kind of also goes to show, I think we always mention it, but I think that kind of drives home the point that when we're looking at macroeconomic data and the trucking industry, the two aren't always hand in hand. There are some that correlate well. There are some that have a good relationship. But overall, when we look at the macroeconomy, it's not going to be always indicative of what's happening in transportation. I think this is a good example of that.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a disconnection at times. There's certain macroeconomic data that's more pertinent given the time period and what we're seeing. But, those unemployment numbers still scare me.
Big time. Yeah, big time.
As something to look at here in the next coming months. When does this demand cycle kind of run its course? It doesn't look like it's going to end in the next month, but what does that mean for the fourth quarter? The fourth quarter is a huge question mark for me right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the things we're looking at, of course, with the stimulus packages, and I think that's a huge uncertainty for many people right now. The thing I always have on economic policies, they're always easy to put in place. They're hard to take away. And so whether that be a government subsidy, whether that be any kind of a program or any kind of allowance, they're easy to put in place. It's almost like, I don't drink, but it's like drinking a lot. You might have a lot of drinks, and maybe you're having a good time. You had a few too many. You're going to feel it the next day. The hangovers are never fun. But I think that's what I'm a little bit wary of, is that hangover effect, where you try to take some of these back, and it's just like, or a caffeine addiction. You try to just go cold turkey, no more caffeine, no more coffee, and now you got the headaches, and you're just like, oh man, what did I just go through? And so I think that's what we're going to see now, potentially in the second half of 2020.
Well, we're already seeing the government kind of pull back, 70% replacement, not 100%. So they're pulling back. They're trying to wean people off and get a lot less reports of people saying, you know what, I don't want to go back to the office.
Right.
This is a sweet deal. I'm getting this check.
Yeah, and there's a lot that goes into that, right? Yeah. I mean, you're not just looking at, okay, I'm getting more money than when I was employed, but now maybe I'm spending more time with the family. Maybe we're just living it up. We're going on vacations, and there's a certain lifestyle that has been accepted now and adapted to. And so Americans have short memories. And it's like, what was life before this? I don't know. And you can see that happen anytime when a major retail outlet has some kind of outrage, or when a fast food place has some kind of food-borne illness. People steer clear for a little bit. Then he's like, you know what? I could really go for fill in the blank.
Yeah. No, everybody kind of settles back into their new normal.
Yeah.
And this, I think we're a little bit, this is human nature. We're adaptable creatures by nature. We're supposed to be able to adapt to the environment around us, and all of a sudden we just become accepting of, maybe it is extremely volatile like we're living in right now. This will not persist, but maybe we've adapted to the fact that, okay, I know it's not going to persist, but I'm kind of comfortable with things being this crazy right now. And you get complacent because it's exhausting to be on edge all the time about what's going to happen next. But we are by no means through this.
Yeah.
All the signs are pointing to, we're going to see a lot more stabilization. We're still seeing so much volatility on the supply chain end, starting to show the earliest signs of the industrial economy coming back. So that still hasn't played out. You've got your, stimulus checks next round coming into play. What does that mean? What is that going to do? On the maritime end, we've got the Port of Savannah this last year reported only a 1% decline in tonnage year over year for their fiscal year. Their fiscal year ended in June, and that includes this COVID world.
Yeah.
Again, we're compressing 12 months into one single data point, or I should say 24 months, but that to me tells me that we've had significant movement. And when you're averaging out 0 and 100, it's still 50.
Yeah.
Whereas we've been used to living in 40 and 60, averaging 50.
Yeah.
We're basically just had a 0 to 100, averaging 50. One data point does not do it justice. One of the reasons I do like the sonar data, because it's right when things are volatile, you want as many reports as possible on a daily basis, just to make sure that you're getting through it. And it's tough to live that way, and people tend to get complacent and say, like, you know what, it's going to go up and down, but you're going to miss out on a lot, if you do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the maritime side also, we have just, one of my favorite new data sets is our ocean shipments index. Henry Byers, our maritime expert, really helped push this along with John Hellis, data scientist. Really did great work here in trying to figure out, all right, we need to get in front of these imports, because that's what's driven a lot of the freight market volatility over the last year to 2 years now. And they've come up with indexes that measure bookings. So basically, they can tell you over the next 7 days what do the bookings look like on the ocean for the major carriers, the alliances and whatnot. And they're showing that they're still going to be up year over the next 7 days, but they're starting to come back into line with other years.
Yeah,
so we're starting
trends
to settle back down. And more concerning than that to me is we're watching some blank sailings occur in October.
Yeah.
Something we haven't seen in a long time. They had been putting capacity back online.
That's going to be an interesting comp.
Yeah, that's why that fourth quarter. But we did have some good macroeconomic releases. Let's dig into those a little bit.
Yeah. On the macroeconomic front, we had, of course, Census Bureau released the durable goods orders. So they had overall durable good orders, which came in at 7.3% in June on a month-over-month basis, and this is after a 15.1% increase in May.
So we're not all the way back, but we recovered. That was our biggest jump.
Yeah, and of course that's on the back of April, where everything just shut down completely. Right. So of course there's going to be that large jump up, but that continued rise of 7.3% for overall durable goods. Putting it into perspective, of course, always have to look at the year-over-year level. It's still down 13.3% year-over-year, right. But we are starting to see that rise. I think one of the big things that we spoke about early on with all of this is that this is going to hit not just state by state differently, but industry by industry differently. And so, for example, motor vehicles and parts and new orders increased 85.7% on a month-over-month basis. This is still down over 25% year-over-year, but it's an increase nonetheless. Compared to non-defense aircraft, so planes, which are piling up, not a lot of people flying around anymore. The demand isn't there. That industry is going to be forever changed or change drastically for a long time to come.
And on that note, United just crushed it with the air cargo side.
Yeah.
They did a really good job. And this is that new world that we're talking about, right. That shifting supply chain, shifting behavior. United, obviously, large international passenger carrier, has been able to refit its fleet to carry air cargo, and they've actually committed to it moving forward now, knowing it's going to be a while before those passengers come back. Yeah. So I think this is that activity that's kind of propping up the economy right now, that changing that adaptable behavior, creating some extra energy that's pushing through the economy.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's going to be those individuals that are able to maneuver and pivot quickly, that are going to be able to really kind of capture a lot of this market share. We spoke about when business start to reopen again. It's going to be those that are able to open in a safe and aggressive manner at the same time to kind of capture that market share and do it in such a way where they're innovative, whether it be more of an e-commerce environment or platform. But definitely when we're looking at that, that's going to be one that drags down overall durable goods. We're looking at aircrafts, of course. But when we're looking at the consumer side, those consumables, those durable goods, those things that have shelf lives of 3 years or more is considered a durable good. And so...
Thank you for the definition.
Of course. And so we're looking at like no toasters and things like that. So not that people are just buying up appliances, but...
I didn't realize this, but apparel is a non-durable good, correct?
Yeah,
because they're considered their shelf life. Just a little fun fact that I like to.
Fabrics.
I've learned that in our interactions together.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that.
Fabrics. Yeah, non-durable good. And who wants to get caught in 2017's outfit?
Not you.
Right. So, there's definitely something to consider.
My closet is full of 2017 gear.
Oh goodness, Zach, we got to go. Express.com.
What,
I mean,
.com?
blank. If you want to sponsor the show.com.
What's this .com you're speaking?
I have no idea. Yeah. But one of the other aspects when we're looking at that report was non-defense capital goods new orders excluding aircrafts, which is a barometer of business-to-business activity. This was one of the areas that was already hard hit before COVID. One of the factors was because of the trade wars in 2019, a lot of pull
Yep.
forward for business investment, and then uncertainty throughout the remainder of the year. And so when we're looking at that increased 3.3%. And as we've seen on a month-to-month basis, 3.3% on a month-to-month basis. But as we look at a lot of the other segments, they have these large swings over year basis. This is only down 2.2% from last year's level.
Wow.
So that kind of shows how weak it already was. And it was, so it's almost like, all right, it was already bad and it's kind of less bad. And so this is going to be an area that we're going to watch closely, because that's going to be an area that's going to potentially come back early if there is any kind of incentive for businesses to kind of come back online, if there's any kind of incentives for manufacturing despite the second wave or additional spikes.
Well, we also have the election to talk about. I mean, that's going to be a big deal. Seeing how people's their spending habits have changed, obviously with the COVID outbreak, but the election cycle, traditionally, when there's a question mark around which party's going to control the House and the Senate and all this kind of, and the president, obviously, there's always a big spending, either resilience, or conservation, depending on how they feel like they're going to be taxed and rewarded, because there's a lot of money involved in that. So there's a few little headwinds there still hanging around.
Quite a bit, yeah. And I was chatting with a good friend, Matt, and Tim Dooner has jokes in here. My good friend Matt in New Mexico, and talking about how different regional and state electees, those government officials, might be acting in order to kind of prompt or propel themselves into this election cycle, to say, this is how I handled the epidemic or the pandemic. This is how what we did, and this is our results, good or bad. This is what we did. Vote for me. And so, I think there's a lot of that positioning going on, and a lot of uncertainty, just as you mentioned.
And people are sitting on cash. They are still sitting on that cash. Those capital expenditures and all these earnings calls that we monitor, none of them have talked about really making huge investment moves by any means, but they are opening up the pocketbook a little bit in order to maintain a lot of this stuff. So, again, we're still sitting on a lot of potential energy in the economy, a lot of uncertainty. I don't think we're over the hump. Do you, Anthony?
It's going to vary. I don't think we're over the hump in certain industries, but I think there is a lot more action to be had in the rest of 2020. And Tim Dooner is just... Him and Vincent are just going off in the comments right now. Michael Vincent says, apparel is not durable when your buffness level is that of mine or Anthony's. Michael, I mean, it
is hard to keep.
Michael Vincent.
Yeah, you guys are big.
Is a freak of nature.
Yeah. Well, y'all are football players.
He's a linebacker.
Y'all are football players. This is irrelevant.
He was a linebacker. I wouldn't want no parts of him as a running back. But with that, that's been our show. I don't know if we have a debate topic right now. I don't know if
I think the debate really is: are we through the biggest cloud of the recovery of the freight market, of the economy? I don't think that we are just yet. I think we still have a lot of questions here over the next 6 months. There's plenty of activity, obviously, that has left to run its course. The industrial economy finally woke up. There's still so many moving parts here that have not settled into what I think we can consider like, okay, now we can rely on this being the new normal for an extended period of time.
Yeah. I think we've got out of the major shakeups, but I think that's not the end of the shakeups.
Yeah, it's kind of like...
I think there's a many smaller... It's like a big earthquake and all the residual...
Aftershocks.
Yeah, all the aftershocks.
Right on. Well, that'll do it for this week's show, and thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out all of our podcasts and Freightcasts on FreightWaves.com and other social media.
Mike Barton, this was a genius. I don't know if enough people know that.
We know.
We know.
I don't know.
Henry Byers is also a genius.
We know that too.
Yeah. I'm just stating facts at this point.
Yeah, okay. Those are